I remember the first time my grandson Caleb ate a whole bowl of fresh-cut pineapple at our kitchen table, back when he was maybe 7 years old, and by the time he was done, he was rubbing at his tongue and the corners of his mouth like a man who had just eaten a spoonful of fire. He looked up at Esther with real worry in his eyes and asked her, "Grandma, is the pineapple supposed to eat me back?" And Esther laughed, not unkindly, because she remembered asking her own grandmother that very same question a lifetime before, and the answer she gave him that day is the very same answer I aim to give you now, laid out plain and complete, the way it ought to have been taught to all of us, long before we ever bit into a piece of that fruit, wondering why our own mouths seemed to be fighting back. Caleb sat there a good while longer, running his tongue along the roof of his own mouth, half amazed and half unsettled, the way a boy is when he discovers the world holds a small mystery, right there in a fruit bowl that none of the grown folks around him had ever bothered to explain. Most folks eat pineapple their whole lives and simply accept the sting and the tingle as some strange quirk of the fruit, same as they accept a hot pepper burns or a lemon puckers, without ever once asking what is truly happening on their own tongue while they chew. And if you have ever set down a fork after a few bites of pineapple because your mouth felt raw, or wondered whether something was wrong with you rather than the fruit, then you are about to understand something that has been sitting in plain sight the whole time, for want of somebody ever taking the time to explain it to you plainly. My name is Elias Yoder, and my own dear people came over from the Palatinate back in the year 1838, and they have farmed this same piece of Lancaster County ground faithfully ever since, though I will tell you plainly, pineapple never grew on any Lancaster County ground in all that time, being a fruit of warmer places entirely. But my grandfather was a man who kept bees and canned fruit and understood, better than most men of his day, how living things are built and how they work upon one another. Because a man who keeps bees learns early that nature is full of small workings most folks never trouble themselves to notice, from the way a bee reads a flower to the way a kept fruit will spoil or keep depending on things you cannot even see with your own eye. It was my grandfather who first explained the pineapple's trick to me as a boy, using nothing more than plain words and a story about laundry, and I have never forgotten it since, and I mean to hand it to you today, the very same simple way he handed it to me, without a single word of jargon standing between you and the plain truth of the matter. Here is the one thing I want you to understand plainly and fully, because once you understand it, you will never eat a piece of pineapple the same way again for the rest of your days. Almost everybody has this backward. They believe the pineapple is somehow burning them, the way a pepper burns with its heat, or the way an acid might sting an open cut. It is not burning you at all, and there is no fire and no true acid working on your skin in the way most folks assume. The truth, plain and simple, is that the pineapple is quietly digesting you, in a small and harmless way, the very same way your own stomach would digest a piece of meat you swallowed. Fresh pineapple carries within it a family of natural substances called enzymes, and the particular one it is famous for is named bromelain, and bromelain's whole purpose in that fruit, same as certain enzymes in your own stomach, is to break down protein, snipping it apart at a small level the way a pair of shears might snip apart a length of thread, piece by piece, fiber by fiber. Your tongue, your lips, and the inside of your cheek are themselves made up largely of protein, same as a piece of meat is, and so while you are chewing that pineapple and thinking only of its sweetness, the pineapple's own bromelain is quietly going to work on the surface of your mouth, breaking down that top thin layer of protein just a little, which is what causes that raw, tingling, almost eaten feeling by the time you reach the last few bites. It is not your imagination, and it is not a flaw in the fruit, and it is certainly not a sign you have somehow eaten a bad piece of it. Pineapple is, in a very real and gentle way, beginning to eat you back, same as it would begin to break down any piece of meat left resting upon it, though it stops well short of doing you any lasting harm, since your body replaces that thin outer layer of skin cells quickly and easily, same as it would after any small everyday irritation, and by the next morning, there is no trace left of it at all. Quick word before I go further. The old methods my family uses, there is more of it than fits in any one video. I gathered the whole of it into a book at eliasyoder.com. The book is the long version. If you want it, it is there. I will not mention it again. Now let me walk you through the why and the how of it, step by step, the way my grandfather laid it out for me at that same kitchen table, where Caleb later sat rubbing at his own tongue. The first thing to understand is what an enzyme actually is. In plain terms, any man or woman can follow without a single day of schooling in chemistry. An enzyme is simply a small worker, a substance built by a living thing to speed along some particular job that would otherwise happen far too slowly to matter. Your own body is full of enzymes of different kinds. One in your mouth to begin breaking down starch the moment you start chewing bread, others in your stomach and further along to break down the protein and fat in your supper. A pineapple, being a living thing itself, has its own workers built in, and bromelain is simply the one most concentrated in the fruit's flesh, and especially in its core, which is why the core of a pineapple often feels stronger and more biting on the tongue than the outer flesh does. The second thing is why this only happens with fresh pineapple, and never with the canned kind, which is a detail my grandfather always thought was the cleverest part of the whole matter, the sort of detail that once you hear it, seems almost too simple to have gone unexplained for so long. Bromelain, like most enzymes, is a delicate worker, and it cannot stand up to real heat. The canning process cooks that pineapple thoroughly, and that heat breaks the enzyme apart, the same way a hard freeze breaks apart a tender plant, leaving it no longer able to do its small work of breaking down protein at all. That is why a man can eat a whole can of pineapple rings without his tongue ever complaining once, while a single fresh slice straight off the counter will have him reaching for a glass of milk before he is through. If you have ever wondered why fresh pineapple bites back and canned pineapple never does, that is the whole of your answer, plain and simple. The third thing, and one that surprises most folks, is that this very same working of bromelain is not some accident of nature to merely be endured, but a genuine and old use our own forebears understood and put to work in the kitchen. My grandmother used a bit of fresh pineapple juice, sparingly, as part of a marinade for tougher cuts of meat, because that very same bromelain that nips at your tongue will, given time, help to break down and tenderize the tougher fibers in a cut of beef or pork, same as a long simmer would, only working from a different direction entirely, softening the fibers from the outside in, rather than cooking them soft from prolonged heat. She never used a great quantity, and she never left the meat sitting in it for hours on end, because too much of a good worker left too long at its job will turn a firm piece of meat to something closer to mush, breaking the protein down further than any cook would ever want. A short soak, no more than an hour or so for most cuts, does the tenderizing kindly, without overdoing the job. The fourth thing worth knowing, plain and useful, is how to enjoy fresh pineapple without suffering more sting than you care for, should your own mouth be a tender one. A short soak of cut pineapple in a bit of salt water, no more than a few minutes, will calm down a good portion of that bromelain's bite without asking you to give up the fresh fruit altogether, because the salt disrupts the enzyme's working just enough to take the edge off while leaving the sweetness and the true fruit behind. Rinse the pieces briefly afterward if you would rather not taste the salt itself, and you will find the fruit eats near about as sweet and pleasant as ever, only far gentler on the tongue than it would have been straight from the cutting board. My own mother favored this trick for the children especially, back before anyone in the family understood the plain science behind why it worked. simply because the old folks had noticed it worked, tried and tested across years of kitchen suppers, long before anyone put a fancy word like bromelain to the reason why. The fifth thing, and one my grandmother always found a fine little trick to teach the grandchildren, is why fresh pineapple will never let a gelatin dessert set properly, while canned pineapple sets up in a gelatin salad just fine. Gelatin itself is nothing more than a particular protein, drawn out of bone and connective tissue by long, slow cooking, and it is that very protein linking arm in arm with itself that lets a gelatin dessert firm up into that familiar wobble. Fresh bromelain, true to its whole nature, will snip apart those very protein links before they ever have a chance to set, leaving you with nothing but a runny, disappointing bowl, no matter how faithfully you follow the recipe. Canned pineapple, its bromelain already broken down by the canning heat, poses no threat to the gelatin at all, and sets up beautifully. My grandmother knew this trick before she ever heard the word enzyme in her life, simply because she had ruined one too many gelatin salads with fresh fruit, and learned, the old way, through plain trial and honest failure, same as most kitchen wisdom of her generation was learned. Now, a word of caution, plainly spoken, because I would be doing you a disservice if I only told you the pleasant, agreeable parts, and never warned you plainly where real care is truly needed. Some folks, more than you might think, carry a real sensitivity to bromelain, sometimes tied to certain pollen allergies, and for them, fresh pineapple can bring on more than a simple tingle, sometimes swelling of the lips or a rash, and that is a different matter entirely from the ordinary mild sting most of us feel, and a matter for a doctor's attention rather than a kitchen trick. If you or someone in your family has ever had a true reaction beyond the ordinary tingle, that is worth mentioning to a physician rather than working around at home. For the rest of us with the common, mild tingle, there is no true harm in it at all, only a passing irritation that settles on its own within an hour or two of finishing the fruit, same as it always has for every generation before us who ate pineapple and lived to tell of it. I would also caution you against the mistake I see folks make most often, which is assuming that because a little bromelain tenderizes meat kindly, a great deal more must tenderize it faster and better still. That is backward thinking. The same backward thinking that leads a man to believe if 1 spoonful of salt seasons a stew well, 10 spoonfuls must season it wonderfully, when in truth, it only ruins the pot. Too strong a marinade or too long a soak will break the meat down past tender and clear into mush, with a strange, soft, almost mealy texture that no amount of good cooking afterward can undo. A light hand and a short soak is always the wiser course, and if you are ever unsure, less time in the marinade and a bit more patience in the cooking pot afterward will serve you far better than reaching for a stronger dose. I want to say something plain here, because I think you deserve the truth rather than a comfortable story. I am not telling you that some man in a boardroom decided folks ought to stay ignorant of why their own mouth tingles after a bowl of fruit. No one had to plan such a thing, and there is no bottle being sold here at all, no product standing behind the mystery, waiting to profit from your confusion. This is simply a case where plain natural science quietly slipped out of the everyday conversation most families used to have around a kitchen table, the way a good many small true things slip away once fewer of us are canning our own fruit or cooking a whole supper from scratch, the way our grandmothers did. When a family cans and cooks and marinates and bakes together, generation after generation, small true bits of science get passed down naturally, without anyone ever calling it science at all, simply because a grandmother noticed something worked and told her daughter, who told her own daughter in turn. Once fewer of us are cooking that way, those small true things have nowhere left to travel, and they quietly vanish from a family's memory within a generation or two, not because anyone hid them, but because nobody was left standing at the stove to pass them along. Nobody profits from your not knowing this, which is exactly why nobody troubled to go out of their way and teach it to you. And that, too, is a kind of quiet loss worth noticing and worth mending in your own home and among your own family, one plain explanation at a time. So let me bring it all back together plainly, so it sticks with you the way a good story sticks after you have told it once or twice yourself. Fresh pineapple is not burning your tongue, it is gently digesting the surface of it, thanks to a natural enzyme called bromelain, whose whole purpose is to break down protein, same as your own stomach's enzymes break down the meat you eat at supper. Canned pineapple never bites, because the canning heat has already broken that enzyme apart before it ever reaches your mouth. That same enzyme, used with a light and patient hand, can tenderize a tough cut of meat in a proper marinade, and a short soak in salt water can calm the sting for a tender mouth without giving up the fresh fruit altogether. And for the rare few, with a true sensitivity beyond the ordinary tingle, that is a matter for a doctor rather than a kitchen trick, plain and simple. Now I would love to hear from you, truly, because I read every single comment, every one, and it is from you folks writing in that I learn how this plays out clear across the country. In kitchens and gardens my own two eyes here in Lancaster County will never see for myself. Tell me, did your own tongue ever tingle after a bowl of fresh pineapple? And did you always wonder why, same as young Caleb did at my own kitchen table? Did your grandmother, or your mother, have her own trick for calming that sting, whether salt water or something else entirely handed down in your own family? A splash of coconut milk perhaps, or simply a warning to eat it slower than you would otherwise care to? What part of the country are you writing in from? Because I know pineapple is grown and loved in some corners of this country, in ways it never could be grown here, on our own Lancaster County ground, and I would love to hear how your own family has always eaten it, whether fresh off the plant or only ever from a can passed down at a holiday table. And tell me, plainly, what other small everyday mysteries in your own kitchen you have always wondered about and never had properly explained to you. Why bread rises the way it does, why milk turns, why a cast iron pan seasons the way it seasons. Because I believe there is a whole quiet country of us who grew up eating and cooking things without ever being told the plain why behind them. And I would like nothing better than to spend some of these videos setting that right, one honest explanation at a time. I have found that the comments section under these videos has become something like a long kitchen table stretching clear across the country, and I do not take that lightly. And if this small explanation helped you see something as ordinary as a bowl of fruit a little differently, I would take it as a kindness if you passed it along to somebody at your own table who has wondered the very same thing without ever asking out loud. Next time, I want to walk with you through why a fresh-cut apple turns brown so quickly on the counter, and the old, simple trick my mother used to keep a plate of sliced apples looking fresh clear through an afternoon without a single bit of trouble or expense, and it will surprise you how plain and how sensible the whole answer truly is once you hear it laid out. I will leave you with this. My grandfather used to say that the natural world is full of small, honest workings, quietly doing their appointed job, whether or not any man stops to notice or understand them, and that a family who takes the time to understand those workings, even something so small as why a fruit tingles on the tongue, is a family a little more at home in the world than one who simply eats and wonders and moves on without ever asking why. There is no great secret in it, and no miracle either, only the plain, patient truth of how a living thing is built, same as there is a plain, patient truth behind near about everything the old folks seem to simply know without ever needing it explained in a school book. I think of my grandson Caleb now, grown into a young man of his own, and I have noticed he has never once set down a fork over a bowl of pineapple since that day at the kitchen table. Because once he understood the plain reason behind that tingle, it stopped being something to fear and became simply something to smile about, the small proof of a living fruit doing exactly what a living fruit is built to do. That is the whole of what these old ways are. When you get down past all the specifics of enzymes and salt water and marinades, they are just the quiet, patient noticing of people who lived closer to their own food and their own land than most of us do today, passed down to whoever is willing to slow down long enough to listen. I am glad you were willing to listen today. Take a moment the next time you sit down to a bowl of fresh fruit, and you will find you taste it a little differently, knowing the plain truth of what is happening on your own tongue, and knowing, too, that a fruit quietly doing its own small, honest work is nothing at all to fear.